court's perspective, much like Judge Boyd himself, is entirely insignificant.
In my 40 years on this bench, I have learned that the black robe I wear is more than just fabric. It is a mirror. It reflects the best and the absolute worst of human nature. I have seen tears of genuine remorse. I have felt the soul-crushing grief of victims, and I have witnessed what I call the fog of privilege. This is the moment a person believes the digits in their bank account can buy them an exit from moral responsibility. But that day, the case of Elena Vance left a different mark on me, not because of the crime itself, but because of the chilling emptiness in her gaze. Elena Vance did not enter my courtroom as a defendant. She walked in like a visiting entity, gracing a lower world with her presence. As the only daughter of a legendary tech billionaire who holds the digital pulse of the world, Elena was accustomed to a world that bent to her will. As I looked down from the bench, I wasn't just reviewing the charges of reckless driving in a school zone. I was looking at the physical map of arrogance. Look closely at her posture. Her shoulders were held with a rigid, manufactured straightness, her chin tilted upward as if the very air in this courtroom wasn't pure enough for her to breathe. Her skin was flawless, maintained by the most expensive treatments money could buy, yet it lacked the warmth of compassion. In the study of physiognomy, the wrinkles around the eyes usually tell stories of smiles or worries, but Elena's face was as flat and cold as a frozen lake. She didn't look at me. She looked through me as if I were merely a piece of outdated furniture in an old building. The incident began on a foggy Tuesday morning. Elena, behind the wheel of a supercar worth more than a middle-class family's entire life savings, tore through a school zone at triple the speed limit. She didn't just break a traffic law. She nearly erased the future of a child crossing the street. When the police finally stopped her, instead of the trembling or regret I usually see, Elena simply rolled down her window and uttered the phrase that would soon haunt every headline. "Do you have any idea who my father is? Stop wasting my time." And now, standing before me, that defiance had not dimmed. As her lawyer attempted to argue that she was under immense psychological pressure from the family business, Elena leaned down and whispered into his ear. It was loud enough for the microphone on the table to catch at a single word aimed directly at me. Insignificant. She called me, the man who has represented justice in this county for 4 decades, insignificant. She viewed the laws protecting children as a mere nuisance. In that moment, a deathly silence smothered the courtroom. I could see the furrowed brow of my court clerk. I could feel the ragged breath of the parents sitting in the gallery. They looked at me, waiting for an explosion, but I did not feel anger. Anger is the weapon of the weak. I simply placed my gavel down, looked deep into those vacant eyes, and realized this was no longer a trial about a traffic ticket. This was a trial to save a soul blinded by gold. I knew exactly what I had to do to show her that in this room, no one is insignificant, except for the person who believes they stand above everyone else. As the bailiff called for the first witness, the atmosphere in the room shifted from cold anticipation to raw, unfiltered pain. Sarah Miller stepped forward. She is a woman whose face is a map of hard work and honest living, the kind of face that has seen the sun rise over a shift at the hospital and set over a stovetop. Her hands, calloused and slightly trembling, clutched a small, tattered backpack. It belonged to her 7-year-old son, Leo. In the study of the human spirit, we look for the light of the eyes, but Sarah's eyes were dimmed by a shadow that no amount of money could ever brighten. I watched Elena Vance as Sarah began to speak. While the mother described the screech of tires and the smell of burning rubber that missed her son by mere inches, Elena did something that chilled the marrow of everyone watching. She adjusted her diamond-encrusted watch and sighed audibly. To her, this wasn't a tragedy, it was a scheduling conflict. Her body language was a masterclass in dismissal. She leaned back, crossing her legs with a practiced elegance that suggested she was sitting in a first-class lounge, not a court of law. "Your Honor," Elena's high-priced attorney interrupted, his voice smooth as silk and twice as slippery. "We acknowledge the emotional nature of the situation, but the fact remains there was no contact, no injury, no damage. This is a technical violation at most. My client was navigating a high-stakes merger that affects thousands of jobs, A near miss in a school zone shouldn't be used to derail the progress of a global industry. I looked at the attorney, then back at Elena. She nodded slightly, a faint, satisfied smirk touching the corner of her lips. This is what the elite call the greater good, the idea that their time, their mergers, and their billions carry more weight than the safety of a child on a crosswalk. In my mind, I began to decode the physiognomy of power. Elena's brow was smooth, untouched by the furrows of worry that define a parent's life. Her lips were thin, pulled tight in a line of calculated indifference. She didn't see Sarah Miller as a person. She saw her as a statistical anomaly, a minor friction in the gears of her father's empire. No injury? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper, yet it cut through the attorney's rhetoric like a cold wind. Sarah Miller let out a stifled sob. I looked at the small backpack in her hands. Mr. Attorney, do you believe the soul is immune to the speed of a 2-ton machine? Do you believe a mother's peace of mind has no market value? Elena rolled her eyes, a quick, sharp movement that screamed her disdain. She leaned over to her lawyer and whispered, loud enough for me to see the movement of her jaw. Is this old man done lecturing yet? I have a flight to Tokyo. That was the moment the chasm opened. On one side stood the quiet, weathered dignity of a mother who nearly lost her world. On the other, the polished, hollow arrogance of a woman who thought she could buy the very seconds of our lives. Elena thought she was winning because her lawyer was expensive and her father was powerful. She didn't realize that in my courtroom, I don't count the zeros in your bank account, I count the tears you've caused. The silence that followed wasn't just a pause in the trial, it was the heavy, suffocating weight of justice preparing to fall. Elena Vance was looking at her watch, but she had no idea that for her reputation, time had already run out. The word insignificant didn't just fall into the room. It lingered like a cold mist, chilling the hearts of everyone who understood the weight of the law. Elena Vance looked at me with a gaze so polished it was reflective you could see your own image in her eyes, but you couldn't see a soul behind them. In my 4 decades of reading the human face, I have encountered many masks, but hers was a masterpiece of biological engineering. Her skin was tight, vibrant, and glowing with the vitality that only unlimited resources can provide, yet the micro-expressions, those tiny, involuntary twitches of the muscles that reveal a person's true state were missing. She had trained herself to be a statue of success, a monument to the Vance family name, where empathy was seen as a structural flaw. I leaned forward, my old wooden chair creaking, a sound of reality in a room filled with expensive illusions. I didn't address her lawyer's talk of mergers or global impact. I addressed the silence. Miss Vamide, I said, and for the first time, her smirk faltered, just by a fraction of a millimeter. You find this proceeding insignificant. You find this courtroom, these laws, and perhaps even the life of a 7-year-old boy walking to school to be minor frictions in your grand design. You see me as a relic, a man in a black robe holding back the progress of your empire. Her lawyer tried to stand, to object, to shield his client from the truth, but I raised a single hand. It was a weathered hand, marked with the spots of age and the steady pulse of a man who has lived a real life. The lawyer sat down. The power in this room didn't come from a billionaire's endorsement. It came from the silent consent of the people who believed that every life has an equal pulse. Elena's eyes narrowed. In the study of physiognomy, the narrowing of the eyes without the tension of the lower lid is a sign of pure, predatory calculation. She wasn't feeling guilt. She was calculating the cost of my annoyance. Let us talk about significance, I continued, my voice resonating off the marble walls. To you, significance is measured in the bandwidth of a fiber optic cable or the closing price of a stock. But in this room, we measure significance by the golden second. That is the second between a child's laughter and a mother's scream. It is the second your luxury machine attempted to steal from Leo Miller. I looked at the gallery. I saw the fathers with their hats in their laps and the grandmothers clutching their pearls. They were the ones she called insignificant. They were the backbone of the world she merely stood upon. Elena leaned over to her lawyer again, her movements sharp and impatient. She didn't realize that every dismissive gesture, every roll of her eyes, was being etched into the record of my judgment. She thought the insignificant comment was a private insult. She didn't understand that in my courtroom, there are no secrets. The mask of her perfection was beginning to crack. Beneath the high-end makeup and the arrogant tilt of her head, I began to see the hollow core of a woman who had never been told no. She was a shadow of a person, fueled by the borrowed light of her father's power. And as I prepared to reveal the next piece of evidence, I knew that the shadow was about to be obliterated by the blinding light of accountability. Elena Vance was waiting for her flight to Tokyo, but she was about to find herself grounded in a reality she never thought applied to her. There is a specific kind of silence that occurs in a courtroom when a person's perceived reality is shattered by the cold, hard light of truth. I call it the vacuum of accountability. Elena Vance sat there, her body angled slightly toward the exit, her mind already in the high-altitude boardrooms of Tokyo. She truly believed that this was a minor transaction, a fine to be paid, a nuisance to be swiped away like a notification on her phone. But I was about to introduce a piece of evidence that didn't come from a witness's memory, but from the very technology her father's empire helped build. "Miss Vance," I said, my voice steady as an old oak. "You mentioned that you were handling important business at the time of the incident. You argued that the delay was a mere misunderstanding of priorities." I signaled to the bailiff to dim the lights. On the large screen behind me, a series of data logs appeared. It wasn't just dashcam footage, it was the telemetry data from her vehicle's onboard computer. In the study of physiognomy, we look for the involuntary flinch. For the first time, I saw Elena's fingers twitch, a micro-movement of her left index finger, a sign that the digital shield she lived behind was beginning to crack. The screen showed her speed, 64 miles per hour in a 15 mile per hour zone. But that wasn't the damning part. The data showed that her car's AI had identified the child, Leo Miller, 4.2 seconds before the near miss. It had issued a warning chime. The computer had begged her to stop, and the logs revealed her response, a manual override. She had pressed the accelerator. She had told the machine that the life in front of her was less important than the destination ahead. I watched her face in the dim light. The polished, frozen lake of her expression was finally showing ripples. Her lower lip tightened, the physiognomy of fear. This wasn't the fear of an accident. It was the fear of being seen. To her, people like Sarah Miller were invisible, but her own data had made her actions undeniable. "Miss Vance," I continued, "you called this proceeding insignificant. But your car's computer recorded something else. It recorded a human choice. It recorded the exact moment you decided that your significance outweighed a child's existence." Elena's lawyer scrambled, his voice cracking as he tried to argue about algorithmic errors and sensor malfunctions. But the room wasn't listening to him. They were looking at Elena. Her mask was slipping. The socialite smirk was gone, replaced by a jagged, sharp-edged desperation. She leaned over and hissed at her lawyer, her words cutting through the silence. "Fix this. My father didn't pay you to let some local judge humiliate me." She still didn't get it. She thought the humiliation was the punishment. She didn't realize that the punishment was the truth. In my courtroom, I don't just judge the act, I judge the intent. And the intent revealed on that screen was a cold, digital indifference to human life. The golden second I spoke of earlier was right there, captured in zeros and ones. It was the second Elena Vance chose herself over everyone else. As the lights came back up, the insignificant judge was no longer a relic in her eyes. I was the mirror she was finally forced to look into. And for the first time in her life, she didn't like what was looking back. The silence that followed the digital revelation was not peaceful. It was heavy, suffocating, and charged with the electricity of a storm about to break. On the screen, the data point of the accelerator pedal at 98% stayed frozen, a digital tombstone for Elena Vance's defense. I watched her closely. In the study of physiognomy, there is a moment we call the threshold of ruin. It is the exact second when a person realizes their shield is not just cracked, but obliterated. Elena's face, once a masterpiece of high society poise, began to undergo a violent transformation. The frozen lake didn't just ripple, it shattered. A deep, blotchy crimson began to climb from her neck to her cheeks, not the blush of shame, but the fire of a cornered predator's rage. I saw a thin vein in her temple begin to throb, a rhythmic pulsing that signaled the internal pressure of a life built on the lie of being untouchable. Her eyes, which had been narrow and calculating, were now wide, glassy, and darting around the room as if searching for a secret door that didn't exist. She was no longer the heiress to a global empire. She was a frightened child, realizing that her father's shadow didn't reach inside these walls. "This is a setup," she suddenly screamed, her voice cracking, losing its rehearsed, melodic tone. She stood up so abruptly her chair screeched against the floor, a sound that made Sarah Miller flinch. "You've tampered with the car. My father's engineers designed that AI. It doesn't make mistakes. You're just a small-town judge looking for a headline. You're jealous of our success." Her lawyer tried to grab her arm, to pull her back into the safety of legal silence, but she shook him off with a snarl. She pointed a trembling, manicured finger directly at me. "You are nothing! My father could buy this entire county and turn it into a parking lot before the sun sets. Do you hear me? You are insignificant." I didn't move. I didn't reach for my gavel. I simply watched her. To the gallery, it was a meltdown. To me, it was a confession. The physiognomy of arrogance had reached its final stage, the delusion of ownership. She truly believed that the world was a commodity to be bought and sold, and that justice was just another line item on a balance sheet. I looked at the parents in the back row. I saw the disgust on their faces, the faces of people who pay their taxes, follow the laws, and pray their children come home safe. Elena Vance had just insulted every single one of them. "Miss Vance," I said, my voice low and steady, providing a sharp contrast to her high-pitched hysteria. "In this room, the only thing that is truly insignificant is the threat you just uttered. Your father's bank account may reach the stars, but it stops at that wooden railing." I leaned forward, letting the weight of my presence fill the space between us. "You aren't screaming because you're innocent. You're screaming because for the first time in your life, you are being seen for exactly who you are. The data doesn't lie, and neither does your rage." She sank back into her seat, her chest heaving, her eyes still burning with a toxic mixture of hate and disbelief. She pulled out her phone, a reflex of her digital life, and began typing furiously, likely a desperate SOS to the billionaire father who had always bailed her out. But as I watched her, I knew the Vance Empire was about to feel its first real tremor. Her reputation, the carefully curated image of the visionary philanthropist, was dissolving in real time under the courtroom cameras. She was waiting for a rescue, but she was about to realize that some fires cannot be put out with money. As Elena Vance slumped back into her leather chair, her chest still heaving from her vitriolic outburst, a new kind of terror began to take root in her eyes. It wasn't the fear of a jail cell, not yet. It was the fear of the digital ghost. You see, in the Vance family, image was the only currency that mattered. They spent millions every year to curate a version of reality where they were the benevolent architects of the future. But in my courtroom, the cameras don't have filters. The microphone doesn't care about your public relations team. Every snarl, every entitled scream, and every time she used the word insignificant was being broadcast to the very world she thought she owned. I watched her check her phone again, but this time, her thumb didn't move with its usual lightning speed. It hovered, trembling. The physiognomy of ruin was now complete. Her expensive foundation had been streaked by the salt of her own rage. Her hair, once a perfect halo of high society grooming, was disheveled. She looked, for the first time in her life, like a common defendant. I could see the exact moment she realized that the Vance brand was being dismantled in real time. On the screens of millions of people, she wasn't the visionary heiress anymore. She was the girl who tried to run over a child and then insulted the law. "Miss Vance," I said, my voice echoing with a quiet finality, "you are so concerned with significance, yet you failed to notice that while you were screaming at me, the board of directors of your father's company was watching this live stream. You were so busy looking down on this courtroom that you forgot that the world is now looking down on you." I saw her face go pale, a ghostly, translucent white that revealed the true fragility of her power. In my study of human behavior, I've found that the most arrogant people are often the most fragile when their stage is taken away. She wasn't a titan, she was a shadow that required a very specific light to exist. I turned my attention to a folder delivered to my bench just moments before. It contained the real-world consequences of her important business. While Elena was overriding her car's safety sensors to make a flight, the panic she caused had ripple effects she never bothered to calculate. Sarah Miller, sitting in the front row, wasn't just a mother. She was a representative of the invisible infrastructure that Elena's family claimed to serve. Sarah worked for one of the Vance subsidiaries. While Elena was screaming that I was insignificant, Sarah's co-workers were watching their boss's daughter treat a fellow employee like a speed bump. The collapse of a reputation doesn't happen with a bang. It happens with 1,000 silent clicks. I could feel the shift in the room. The air was no longer thick with Elena's arrogance. It was heavy with the weight of her impending fall. She had built her empire on the idea that she was better than us. But as the evidence mounted, the foundation of that empire was revealed to be nothing but sand. She looked at me, and for the first time, there was a flicker of something that looked like a plea. But I wasn't there to save her reputation. I was there to save the dignity of the law. Elena Vance wanted the world to know her name, and by the time I was finished, they would, but for all the reasons she feared most. The gavel remained still on my bench, yet its presence felt like a mountain of granite pressing down on the room. Elena Vance was no longer the statuesque heiress of Part 1. In the study of physiognomy, we speak of the structural failure of the ego. Her shoulders had rounded, her chin once tilted toward the heavens. In a gesture of supreme arrogance was now tucked against her chest. The crimson rage had faded, leaving behind a sallow gray complexion that made her look older, frailer, and remarkably ordinary. The insignificant judge she had mocked was now the only person in the world who held the keys to her future. "Miss Vance," I began, my voice carrying the weight of the thousands of lives I had seen pass through this room. "You spent your life believing that significance is something you inherit or buy. You thought that because your father's name is etched in glass and steel across the globe, the laws of gravity and the laws of humanity did not apply to you." I paused, letting the silence amplify her isolation. Her lawyer sat perfectly still, his eyes fixed on a legal pad. He knew. The Vance family's PR firm was likely already drafting a statement to disown her actions to save the stock price. The empire was already self-correcting by cutting off the infected limb. "You called me insignificant," I continued, leaning forward until I could see the tiny tremors in her hands. "But today, you discovered that significance is not found in a bank balance. It is found in the golden second you tried to steal from a child. It is found in the calloused hands of Sarah Miller. And right now, it is found in this piece of paper." I held up the sentencing order. For the first time, I saw a tear escape the corner of her eye, not a tear of empathy, but the bitter salt of a broken pride. The sentence I delivered wasn't designed to bankrupt her. Her father's billions made a fine a joke. It was designed to force her to inhabit the world she found so insignificant. "I am sentencing you to a maximum fine of $250,000 to be paid immediately to the Pediatric Trauma Fund," I declared. "But that is the easy part. Your driver's license is revoked for 3 years. You will walk, or you will take the bus, like the people you nearly ran over. Furthermore, you are sentenced to 1,000 hours of community service. You will not be filing papers in an office. You will be a patient transport assistant at the very trauma center where children like Leo Miller are taken when people like you decide their time is more valuable than a life." I watched the final collapse. Her head dropped into her hands. The insignificant local judge had just stripped the elite socialite of her mobility and her dignity, forcing her into a world of bedpans, bandages, and the raw, unedited pain of others. I looked at the gallery, at the parents, and the workers. I saw them nod. They weren't looking for blood. They were looking for balance. Elena Vance had entered this room, thinking she was the protagonist of the universe. She was leaving it as a woman who finally understood that in the eyes of the law, a billionaire's daughter is exactly the same as a janitor's son. The insignificant had spoken, and the empire of her ego had officially turned to ash. 6 months have passed since the gavel fell in that courtroom, but the echoes of Elena Vance's screams still resonate through the digital corridors of her father's crumbling empire. In the world of high finance and viral media, a reputation takes decades to build and only a single golden second to destroy. The insignificant judge didn't just issue a sentence. he triggered a landslide. Shortly after the trial, the Vance Group stock plummeted by 22% in a single week. The board of directors, the same people Elena thought she represented, issued a cold, sterile statement distancing the company from her individual actions. Her father, the man who she thought could buy the sun, didn't buy a parking lot. He bought silence. He retreated into his towers, leaving his daughter to face the world she had mocked. I recently received a report from the hospital where Elena is serving her 1,000 hours. In the study of physiognomy, we look for the great softening. It is the moment when the hard, artificial lines of ego are worn away by the friction of real life. Elena no longer wears the diamond-encrusted watch or the labels that scream for attention. She wears a blue scrub top and a pair of practical shoes. Her skin is no longer glowing with the artificial vitality of expensive spas. It carries the pale, honest exhaustion of a person who has spent 10 hours on her feet, helping elderly patients reach the bathroom or holding the hand of a child waiting for surgery. I visited the hospital undercover last week just to observe. I saw her in the hallway, pushing a wheelchair. A young boy, not much older than Leo Miller, was sitting in it. She wasn't looking at her phone. She wasn't checking the time. She was leaning down, listening to the boy tell a story about a toy he had lost. In that moment, the physiognomy of arrogance was gone. Her chin was tucked, her shoulders were relaxed, and for the first time, her eyes held the light of the soul. She looked significant, not because of her name, but because she was finally useful to another human being. As I walked away, I thought about the lesson for all of us. We live in an age where we are told that our reach, our followers, and our impact are measured in data and dollars. We are tempted to look at the insignificant people around us, the bus drivers, the nurses, the local judges, as mere background noise to our own grand stories. But the story of Elena Vance proves that the only thing that truly lasts is how we treat one another when we think no one important is watching. Justice isn't about revenge. It's about restoration. It's about reminding the Elenas of the world that they breathe the same air and bleed the same red as the Michaels and the Sarahs. As I sit here today, preparing for my next case, I am reminded that no one is too powerful to be held accountable, and no one is too small to be protected. The insignificant judge has finished his work on this case, but the work of humanity continues. Remember, your life isn't defined by the empire you build, but by the hearts you help heal.